Judge Greg Mathis walked into the courtroom with a familiar sense of authority, his robe flowing and his expression stern, ready to take control of yet another high-profile case. The cameras were rolling, the audience was buzzing, and his reputation as a sharp-tongued and quick-witted judge was about to be tested. Sitting at the counsel table, however, was Jasmine Crockett, the fiery and brilliant attorney who had recently made headlines for her unshakable confidence and fearless approach in the face of adversity. At first glance, Mathis thought she was just another young lawyer trying to prove herself in a courtroom where his word carried weight like a gavel strike, and with that thought, he decided to test her mettle. As the case began, Mathis leaned forward with a smirk and interrupted Jasmine mid-sentence. "Ms. Crockett, do you really believe you can argue this point against the mountain of evidence in front of us, or are you just here to put on a show?" The audience chuckled lightly, some even whispering as though they expected Jasmine to shrink under the pressure of his cutting words. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she straightened her blazer, met Mathis's sharp gaze, and said with calm precision, "Your Honor, I am not here for a show. I'm here for justice. And I suggest we let the facts, not the assumptions, guide us today." That response silenced the whispers, and Mathis raised an eyebrow, slightly taken aback. He wasn't used to such poise being thrown back at him so swiftly. As the hearing continued, Jasmine began weaving her arguments with surgical precision, citing precedents that even Mathis had to admit were rarely brought up with such clarity. She didn't stumble, her voice was steady, her reasoning airtight, and her command of the law undeniable. At one point, Mathis attempted to corner her again, asking sarcastically, "So are you suggesting that decades of established rulings are irrelevant because you found one or two exceptions that suit your case?" Without missing a beat, Jasmine replied, "Not at all, Your Honor. I'm suggesting that when justice demands a careful review, we cannot ignore exceptions simply because they make us uncomfortable. After all, the law is not about convenience, it's about truth." The courtroom murmured again, this time not in mockery but in admiration. Mathis leaned back in his chair, his smirk fading into something more serious. He realized that Jasmine wasn't just another attorney, she was a force. With every piece of evidence she introduced, every logical point she made, she dismantled the foundation of the opposing counsel's argument. Mathis found himself no longer trying to embarrass her, but instead listening intently, as though he were learning from her. As the hours passed, the atmosphere shifted entirely. Where once the audience had expected to see a judge put a young lawyer in her place, they now witnessed the undeniable brilliance of a woman who refused to be silenced. Even the opposing counsel, who had entered the courtroom with arrogance, began to shuffle uncomfortably as Jasmine cornered them with irrefutable logic and a command of the law that left them speechless. Near the conclusion of the case, Mathis asked a final question, his tone no longer mocking but genuinely curious. "Ms. Crockett, do you truly believe your client deserves the full measure of justice you've outlined today?" Jasmine looked him directly in the eye and said firmly, "Your Honor, I don't just believe it, I know it. Because justice isn't a privilege for the few, it's a right for all. And if we as officers of the court don't uphold that, then we are failing not just the law, but the people we serve." The room fell into complete silence. For a long moment, Mathis didn't speak. He stared at her, his usually unshakable demeanor softening as he realized what had just happened. He had come into this courtroom expecting to put Jasmine Crockett in her place, but instead, she had put the very concept of justice into perspective in a way that humbled even him. Finally, Mathis nodded slowly and said, "Ms. Crockett, your argument is not only compelling but deeply rooted in the very principles this court is meant to uphold. I must admit, I underestimated you." A faint smile tugged at Jasmine's lips, but she said nothing more. The judgment that followed was in favor of her client, a victory not just for the case, but for the idea that brilliance and courage could overcome intimidation and arrogance. As the courtroom dispersed, whispers turned into praise, and the story of Jasmine Crockett standing her ground against Judge Mathis began spreading beyond the walls of that courtroom. Mathis, a man known for his sharp tongue and commanding presence, walked away that day with a newfound respect for the young attorney he had once hoped to embarrass. He would later recall, "That woman reminded me why I chose this path in the first place, because justice needs voices that will never back down." And Jasmine Crockett walked out not just as a victor of a case, but as a symbol of resilience, brilliance, and the undeniable truth that when you stand firm in what's right, even the most powerful figures cannot overshadow your light. Judge Greg Mathis entered the courtroom with his usual commanding presence, confident that his sharp wit and years of experience would once again allow him to dominate the proceedings, but what he did not expect was that on this day, he would come face to face with Jasmine Crockett, a rising legal star whose sharp intellect and fearless determination had begun to draw national attention. And as the cameras rolled and the audience settled in to witness the case unfold, Mathis thought this was the perfect moment to test and perhaps even embarrass the young attorney in front of a packed house. So as Jasmine rose to deliver her opening remarks, he interrupted her with a smirk, questioning whether she really believed her argument could hold up against the evidence, a remark that drew light laughter from the crowd and whispered assumptions that this would be another display of Mathis's ability to put a lawyer in their place. But Jasmine was not the kind to shrink under pressure. Instead, she stood taller, looked Mathis directly in the eye, and with calm yet commanding resolve declared that she was not there to put on a show but to pursue justice, instantly silencing the chuckles and shifting the atmosphere. And as she laid out her case, weaving facts, legal precedents, and undeniable logic together with flawless precision, it became clear that this was no ordinary attorney. For every time Mathis tried to corner her with a sarcastic question or a dismissive interruption, Jasmine countered with an answer so precise and compelling that even he was left momentarily speechless, and when he challenged her by suggesting she was cherry-picking exceptions to long-standing rulings, she calmly explained that exceptions were not inconveniences but necessary checks to ensure justice was truly served, pointing out that the law was not designed for comfort but for truth, a statement that not only silenced Mathis but also drew murmurs of admiration from the audience, who now realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. And as the case progressed, Jasmine dismantled the opposing counsel's arguments piece by piece, her confidence unwavering, her knowledge impeccable, and her delivery so powerful that even the once arrogant opposing attorney began to falter under the weight of her brilliance, and soon Mathis, who had initially sought to embarrass her, found himself genuinely listening, studying her every point as though he too were being reminded of the very foundations of justice he had sworn to uphold. And when the final arguments were made, Mathis, no longer smirking, asked her sincerely if she truly believed her client deserved the justice she had so passionately argued for, to which Jasmine responded with unshakable conviction that she did not merely believe it but knew it, because justice was not a privilege for the powerful but a right for all, and if the court failed to uphold that, it failed the people it was meant to serve. And in that moment the entire room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a solemn truth too powerful to ignore, and Mathis, usually quick with a retort, could only nod slowly, visibly humbled, before admitting that he had underestimated her and acknowledging that her argument was not only compelling but a reminder of what the pursuit of justice was truly about. And with that, the judgment was delivered in favor of Jasmine's client, sealing a victory not just in the courtroom but in the hearts of those who had witnessed the battle. For Jasmine Crockett had not only defended her case but had also proven that brilliance, resilience, and the courage to speak truth to power could disarm even the sharpest critics. And as she walked out of the courtroom that day, the whispers of doubt had transformed into words of praise, and Judge Greg Mathis himself carried away a newfound respect for the woman he had once hoped to embarrass but who instead had reminded him why justice must always remain the highest calling. And that moment became not just a victory in law but a story of how one fearless attorney turned a courtroom challenge into a shining example of legal brilliance and unshakable resolve.